in quarantine. It's unbelievable. Well, oh, Uri Goldstein. Oh, suddenly seeing your face. What you doing here? You're in a hotel? That's nice. Very nice. Wow. Okay, this is a topic which I taught quite a few years ago, and I'd like to do it again always because as the pasuk says, "Enko chadash tachas hashemesh," is nothing new tachas hashemesh under the sun, and the Medrash says, but tachas hashemesh there's nothing new, but me'al hashemesh there is new, which is in Torah. And that's the Chayra Pelek. If they really are Chidushei Torah, that means Moshe Rabbeinu didn't hear it. If that's the case, Mistama, it's not Torah. Not Mistama, it's definitely not Torah. So what's meant that there's Chodesh Tach Me'al Hashem? So the emphasis that Rashi says it there on the spot. Rashi says, what is the Chodesh found in Torah? Ma'adat is it, just as a suckling, a young baby, that it sucks the breast of its mother. Kol mashim and mashbush by moitzai by tam. Somehow, well, I don't remember it, but Rashi seems to be saying that every time it touches the breast and is sucking more milk, it finds other flavors. In other words, the question is not the Torah is old, but you find a subjective taste in it that you didn't experience before, and that's what we call Chidushei Torah. Reb Chaim Volozhiner writes in Keser Rosh, that's the Anhagos of Reb Chaim Volozhiner, they're printed usually in some of the editions of the Siddur Agra. He writes that people think Chidushei Torah is to say who knows what. No, Shtiyot. Chidushei Torah means clarity. To what extent have you found more clarity in the sugya? That's your Chidushei Torah. More that it's clear to you, you understand it clearly, you have a broader scope, a deeper depth, a clarity. That's called Chidushei Torah. Behirus. The Lashon of the Rav in Torah or of the Balatanya, he writes, "Lahavin es asugya al burya, mechol tzad mechol pina." The idea is to have clarity with the total scope. This is the idea of Chidushei Torah. So I would say that this is a sugya that every time I learn it, I find other flavors in it, and therefore I feel this is begeder chodesh tachas hashemesh. Well, let's start with a reality. Now, before I explain what I'm about to say, I need to give a small hagdama. And that is, we obviously have to try to define in modern terms, how do we define exactly, is this book the Chamisha Chumshe Torah? What exactly is this book? Well, in literary terms, obviously, we're going to be talking at the moment. Well, let's look at it very carefully. It's definitely not a history book. I mean, there's no such thing as a history book, but there's no sequence in it, no historical sequence. And we know that Rashi's Shita at least is that overall, Ein Mukdamu Muchaber Torah, even Pshuto Shel Mikra, that there's no logical historical sequence in the book. Anybody reads Parshas Lech Lecha knows it's all topsy-turvy. Goodness sakes, the Melchemes HaMelachim happened. The Brisbane Absurim happened before the Lech Lecha. For goodness sakes, so we go on and look in Tanakh Seder Olam, you'll see that parsha in Chumash is totally topsy-turvy. It's all totally not sequential. Now, to say that this would be called a history book would be bad. It's simply not. It defies the definition by calling it a history book. Ultimately, it's not that. Is it a novel? And that would be a terrible way of calling it a novel. It would be a very bad author. For the novel, by definition, must have fleshed out characters. And these characters are we don't know who they are. I just did a small example. What do you know about Moshe Rabbeinu, one of the major characters of the Bible? You know he was born. You know he was put into a basket, bound by a princess. Then we know he went back to his parents for 2 years as a suckling. Then we know nothing more about the man until he's 12. When he's 12, he walks out, kills somebody. The next day, that's his bar mitzvah present. After a day after killing somebody on the first day that he's 12, the second day he simply walks out and tries to intervene again with another 2 people. They tell him off. Then he runs away. And the next time we meet him, he's like 80 years old. He goes to Midian after a long sojourn. You read Ramban, you'll see whatever happened for those 67 years in the middle, totally we don't know. That's very interesting. Now, obviously, if that's the case, you must understand that the author is not interested in telling you what happened to him. It's totally irrelevant to the narrative of the story. The story must be read without that information. Now, what kind of, or take example of Avion. Do you really think the only conversation he had with his wife was on the way going down to Egypt when they're roughly 70-something years old? Well, when you get married, you'll understand. The first time in his life he gave her a compliment, are you kidding? He would be sleeping on the rooftops. There ain't no way. Remember, when you get married, at least 3 times a day, I love you, you're beautiful. Now, how is it this man comes and tells the first compliment to his wife only at the, oh, by the way, I noticed your reflection. Come on. When you learn Chumash, like try to learn without Rashi for a moment, what are you reading there? What is the author, or rather the celestial author, God, as we know him, what does he want to tell you? What does he want to tell you? Like, what kind of book is this? It is so far from being literature that's pretend we know nothing about the people. All you know is one conversation with his wife, and then you have another conversation where she tells him, get rid of this lady with your son. Is that it? Did you ever try analyzing a person by one occurrence? Did you ever get angry at anybody and that person sees that anger and now and is now going to analyze your whole being by that story? That would be a fallacy. You're a complex human being, which has so many occurrences in your life. If I wanted to analyze you, I'd have to have the total picture. I'd have to have a broad scope. It's like saying a svara in a sugya without knowing shas. Yeah, this is litzanis. Because at the end of the day, don't you know that everything touches everything? And there's a great sefer, Shilas David, by Reb David Karliner. He never uses achrayim, only Rishonim. And he writes in his, it was a Gadol Ador of Meir Simcha that was scared of him. Reb Chaim was scared of him. He was like the big man at the time. He writes in his Agdam, he says, really, I don't really quote too many things more in Rishonim, but I promise you one thing. Every svar I rolled it through all of Bavli Yerushalmi to make sure there's no stira to it. Oh, that's you can't learn, and then I understand. That's called learning. Less than that, Lincoln Logs. Let's get used to the idea. So now the same thing over here. You're going to analyze a person. What do you know about a person? Do you know the broad picture? Do you know? So how can you analyze who Moshe Rabbeinu was? I've heard this garbage analysis about the relationship of Yitzchak and Rivka. Obviously, she didn't talk to him, and she went behind his back. You fool! Should I tell you about how many times he bought her flowers, and they had this unbelievable honeymoon? Are you kidding? He was romantic. She was sexy. I don't know what. How would you know anything about that relationship? Think for 2 minutes. I mean, this is the lack of intellectual honesty is so overwhelming that almost you feel if this is Torah, I would try Buddhism. It's obviously not, and I haven't tried Buddhism. It's obviously not Torah. That is not. There's no way you can with intellectual honesty analyze a person, a character, without having full scope of information. Just you can't really analyze halacha. If I would ask you to define to me the concept of kedushin, I would tell you that unless you really know it, all of it, you know nothing, and your svaros are worth a dime a dozen. There's no way you can really say this and know it unless you have the broad scope, and then you analyze all the ramifications and all the laws, and then you consolidate that into some major meta halachic idea, and that would be your hagdora of kedushin. That's probably why we say Kedas Moshe v'Yisrael. We're nicely saying we don't know what the are doing, but what the rabbis decide I'm doing, that's what I'm doing. You know what I mean? That's really what you're doing when you say Kedas Moshe v'Yisrael. It's like when you buy software. You buy software online, then you have they send you this Megillas Esther that you're supposed to put a check at the bottom that none of you read. Because you don't really know what you're buying, but you trust them. Okay? You trust them. That's what that your das is whatever they said there. That's what I'm doing. The same thing you're doing Kiddushin. You're saying, I'm a freaking Amoritz. I know nothing of what we're really doing here. This poor girl thinks she's being sanctified. And I think she is a Korban Oila or something like that. And she thinks she has gossamer wings on her back and she with cherubic, face, and she's an angel. She's sanctified and hallowed. That's why she's wearing white. The truth of the matter, all it means when you said to her, lady, you're being cut off from any sexual encounter with anybody except for me. Can you imagine saying that in English under the chuppah? Wouldn't do too well with the mother-in-law. So you got to get used to the idea that people don't really know what they're saying. They're using terms because they don't know the scope. Same thing here. So now what kind of book is written that gives you characters which you don't even give you the information, don't flesh out the characters, nothing at all. What is the book? Can you define the book? Well, you obviously, when you take English lit in college, or maybe you're going to Harvard to go to university, whatever it be, you will learn the only sort of literature which is that way, which is geared to that, is called short stories. You ever read Gita Bappason or I don't know what, or O. Henry? The short story, the character has no meaning. The character is a means towards an end to deliver an idea and a message. You must only know about the character as much as needed to deliver the message. The characters are nothing more than a means to an end. It's not the story of the characters, it's the story which is being told, and the characters are being used to present the story. In such a genre, we do not care about fleshing out the characters. We don't care about anything else. We're using them. So what you have in the Chumash, we never know what these people are. I don't know who Moshe Rabbeinu was. I wouldn't know from Adam. How could I know? I wouldn't know who Avraham Avinu is. How could I know? I wouldn't know a thing about them. What do I know about Joseph? Was he on the spectrum or wasn't he? I don't know. I don't know what he was. I know one thing, that the literary character called Joseph, I must try to understand him in as much as I can, only as a literary character, to understand through that what message does God, the author, want to give me through the story of this specific story of the character. It's because of that, we're not interested in the relationship of Avram person and Sarah person. We're really interested in the messages that God wants to tell us through taking snippets of their history and try to understand what he wants to teach us through those small snippets of history that he put together in a beautiful collage with a sequence which is needed not for history, but for the deliverance of his messages. That is the sequence of the Torah. And in order for us to understand, what does he want from me? So yes, I must understand not who Moshe Rabbeinu was. I really wouldn't know. I really don't know. I got 67 years of a void. I'm clueless. There's no way I can know. I can analyze him later in life, which is a bit more interesting, but that's not for today. But at the moment, I really can't say who he was. What I do know is that there's a literary character out there which suddenly became the greatest prophet in history. It was the medium through which God gave the Torah to the world. That I know about the man. And obviously certain occurrences in his history are needed for us to understand that and what that means. That I do know. So here I want to now analyze the literary character called Moshe, not the person of Moshe. I wouldn't dare. But I will definitely analyze the literary character called Moshe, again, within the context of this short story. And here it goes. We look at I think Moshe Rabbeinu is presented in the Chumash in two totally different ways. The first time he's presented is in Parshas Shmos, and the second time he's presented is in Parshas Va'era. Now in Parshas Shmos, let's read about this for a moment. Okay, if you have Chumash, nice, and if you don't, we'll just do it on our own. And here we have a story of Vayelech Ish. This is in Perik Bet. Vayelech Ish mi Bet Levi, Mr. Anonymous, from the house of Levi. Vayikach, and he took in marriage at Bat Levi, the daughter of Levi. He may have had many daughters. We have no clue. The author does not bother to tell you who they are. We don't know, was he Amram Gadol Hador? I wouldn't know. For all I know, was a highway robber. I have no idea. In other words, the identity of the parents is totally irrelevant to the literary character as being presented now. Now, Vatara Isha, this anonymous lady was impregnated, and she gave birth to a male. Vatera Osikitov, she saw he was good. Now, let's understand what this means when we read the Chumash. We try to read Chumash, first of all, without agadic material. She sees he is good. Now, what does that mean? So the natural kindergarten boy will say, Rashi says, Nismala Abai is Kula Eira. They didn't need electricity. The lights went on, which is obviously ludicrous. It's a metaphor. Now, when we look at light in the mikra, what do we think of? We think of cognizance, awareness. The tool which allows us for awareness and for cognizance equals to become enlightened. So you're going to say at the most, according to Midrash, that means she noticed that this child somehow gives a rise in my acute capabilities of awareness. Don't know what it means. Maybe she had an intuitive feeling that I suddenly become aware of things when this child is here. Interesting. But what does it simply mean? That's what Rashi means to say. She had an acute feeling of awareness that Nismala Abayis Oira, the house was full of light equals cognizance, enlightenment. What does it simply mean? Very simple. Type is nothing more than a subjective term. As Maimonides elaborates in the first volume of the guide in the second chapter, there is no objective good or objective bad. Good and bad are nothing more than terms describing what your feelings are towards a phenomenon, how you react to something. When you say something is right or wrong, that's a mathematical truth. That's an objective reality. 1 and 1 is 2, whether you like it or not, it is. But 1 and 1 is to say it is good is preposterous. It is good means to say it gives me a good feeling if you enjoy the fact that that is $2 million that you won in the lottery. But if that same 2 is $2 million that you owe in back taxes, you feel bad. So the question of good and bad has nothing to do with the number. It has to do with your reaction to the number. So when she say Vayashki type, she gave him an intuitive good feeling. That's what it means. She felt good about the child. Okay, now what generated that feeling good about the child? One does not know. It could simply be chen. We have that idea. Some people claim, but this has to be noted uniquely for this Mrs. Anonymous. She felt very good about the child. That's all we know. That's what Rashi comes and says, because she felt an intuitive sense of enlightenment. But this is what it means. Vataki tov. She said it was good, and therefore she said it was worth it to hide him and hope that he will succeed because he somehow exuded a feeling of goodness. But she hid him for 3 months, etc. So we know Mr. Anonymous married Mrs. Anonymous. They had an anonymous child, which Mrs. Anonymous felt good about. She hid him for 3 months, put him into a basket. Now, what happens next? She takes him down to the river, going down the river. And once again, he has an anonymous sister. Do you notice? There's no names. An anonymous sister stands there. And then we have Bat Paro. Obviously, he had many banot. He had many banot. Man had many wives and many pilakshim, concubines. No reason to say he only had one daughter. That would be ludicrous. Okay. Bat Paro means one. Once again, the anonymous daughter of Paro. Who was it? You really can't know. There is a Bitya Bat Paro Shemardaba Avia found in Divrei Yamim that married Kalev. But whoever says this is the same one, I'm reading Chumash. The Chumash doesn't tell you who it was. So first of all, we don't know, and it's not important. You know, the identity of the Bat Paro is not important. Now we have to figure out why. So far, we have nothing in our eyes. We don't care who the father was. We don't care who the mother was. We don't care who the sister was. And we don't care who the adoptive mother is. Now she opens up. B'nei nar bocher. The Ramban already says it means a young child which screams. But Tachmolov, she had compassion. She said, "Mialdei Ivrim." This is one of the Aldei Ivrim, which means to say a child of those who were born on the other side of the river, which could be any Semite living coming from Eretz Canaan. It could be the Jews. It could be the Hyksos, which were the Bedouin rulers of Egypt for years, which had just then been turned over and moved away. She knew he was definitely a Yeled HaIvri, okay, a Semite versus a Chamite. The Egyptians were all Bnei Cham. They're brownish, and the Semites, the children of Shem, the Ivrim, were slightly whiter. To say, as you notice, if you go down the street in New York, you'll notice the difference. So then here you have the same thing. She knows he was the Yaldei Ivrim, and she kept him. And again, the son of his sister tells to Bas Paro, etc. And they bring it to the mother, and everything's very nice. He's there for 2 years because that's the amount of time that he's gomel. Usually, children do not breastfeed more than 2 years. That's why the Ramban Taka writes it was 2 years. Makes sense. Now we skip. So now what happens? He comes back to the house of Pharaoh. Does he know he's Jewish? You have no indication of that. By the bare fact that the next pasuk is in Perek Yudal, Vahi bayamim hahem vayidal Moshe v'yitzel Achav. Why didn't he go before? Ramban points out because he didn't know he was a Jew before. Now here we have Mr. X. She's called a name in Egyptian, and so we know he's called Moshe, which obviously comes from Egyptian name. He had Mr. X and Mrs. Y were his parents. He obviously had a bris. He was Jewish. And he probably had a name. I'm sure they made a name. And the Chazal give quite a few Hebrew names for Moshe Rabbeinu. Yet, that name is not mentioned because it's also irrelevant to the person. The literary care that we know, we don't care who his Jewish father was, who his Jewish mother was, who his Jewish sister was. We don't care about he had a Jewish name. Do you realize that? He's a clean slate. That's what this child is. And he's actually adopted in the household of Pharaoh. We don't care whether that stepmother was holy or she was, I don't know, the whore of Babylon. We don't know who she was. It doesn't say. All we know is he's growing up in the house of Pharaoh and he doesn't know he's Jewish. At the age of 12, someone tells him he's Jewish. That's what it says. Read Ramban. At the age of 12, someone tells him he's Jewish. Now, what happens? Let's understand where he grew up. I got to figure out what this means. It means to say that for the first 2 years that he was at home with dad and mom, whatever information they gave him did not sink in. It means he was totally unaware of his Jewish background and his genes. And although he was there until the age of 2, he remembered nothing. In other words, in his life, he doesn't have a biological father and a biological mother. He doesn't. He doesn't know he's Jewish. He doesn't know anything. He's only told he's Jewish. Did anybody tell him who his biological father and mother was? It doesn't say that either. Now this kid walks out and he obviously has an acute sense of social awareness and a very strong sense of justice, to the extent he's a bit hot-headed and he kills somebody. Truth of the matter is, if you read the Chumash going down until the end, he every so often had bursts of anger. He screamed at his brother for burning the Sirah Chatas. He screamed at the Jews, called them Shimon HaMorim. Rambam says that was his sin in Mei Meriva. He couldn't contain his temper and he showed anger to the Jews. Seems to me that Moshe Rabbeinu has somewhat of a anger issue. Okay, it's okay to be imperfect. It's very nice to see him as an imperfect prophet. Makes him feel human. Okay, and this is the Moshe Rabbeinu, which that anger was obviously expressed. He saw this person hurting a Jew, which he just found out was his brother, or so to speak, his relative. He went and he wiped him out. He did a pretty lousy job. It says, he was sure no one was there, but I guess he didn't look too well because everybody knew. He walked out the street next day, everybody knew what he did. So we're clearly aware that obviously this is not a well-planned and well-calculated person. He was he knee-jerk reaction, and he murdered this person because his anger went up. Okay. Due to a acute sense of justice, that's why he also can't stand people hitting each other, and so on and so forth. Where did he grow up? What is the Egypt he lived in? Well, I don't know if you remember the Chumash. The Chumash says in Parshas Va'era, when it describes the Makas B'chayros, the Makas B'chayros was supposed to be that the firstborn of every father was going to die. Obviously, there's only one father in the family. That means one child is supposed to die. And yet the pasuk says, "Ein bayis she'ein bay meis," and Rashi points out it means that there were a lot of children dying in every household. Which means, obviously, let's just say Father's Day was a confusing day in Egypt. Because obviously there were a lot of different non-known fathers in every family. Rashi says, "Mitzrayis mizanis hayu." I know there's certain neighborhoods in New York, in Brooklyn area, that you go around, you see there's always mothers there. There's no fathers. You notice that? And Father's Day must be the most confusing day in that kind of neighborhood. It's like the Asur Yuchsin Shalom Ibavo. You have the Shtukim over there and the Asufim. You know, I don't know. No one knows who Daddy is. How would you know? Well, you just told me that's the norm of Egypt. Egypt is a place where sexual behavior is not restricted. To the extent that the prophet Ezekiel, Yecheskel Hanavi, when he describes Egypt, he calls them Zirmatsusim Zirmosum. Their sperm, their seed, is like the sperm of horses. Now, what does that mean? They are not horses. They don't have tails. No, it means to say that just as a horse engages in an act of social liaison simply for pleasure, he's not exactly thinking about genealogy. He's not thinking of procreation for the future, bringing a child into being. That's not the agenda of male horse. When male horse is in heat and the female mare is in heat, they're not exactly thinking about which neshamas of horses are going to bring down to the world, to say the least. They do not think about the past, do not think about the present, think future, they think totally about the present. The fact that there will be a small foal coming out of her womb, that's simply the price they pay for their own private pleasure. You know, there are many societies like that the relationship of man and wife are totally in the present, have nothing to do with, or female and male, have nothing to do with the past and nothing to do with the future. They totally reside in the present, and the present, and the child is what we call oops. I once had a kid in KBY, comes into my office, and he's really down. So he says, "Oh, X, why are you so down?" Says, "Rabbi, you know what the average family living in Manhattan, how many children they have?" Says, "Yeah, 1.6. It's 1.6 children and 2.5 dogs." Okay? And so the kid says, "Rabbi, I'm a 0.6 kid." That was tragic. They didn't really want me. That was his feeling. He was oops. He was the mistake. Sorry. Well, it happened. It took a lot of time to undo that damage, believe me. A lot of time. But that's the way it is, isn't it? You go down the Upper West Side, you'll see people walking with two little chihuahuas wearing Burberry sweaters, but no children. I'm not joking. You see the Burberry sweaters on Broadway. Say, Burberry sweater. I don't buy that for myself. And this guy has two for his two little chihuahuas. But that's the world you're in, right? That's the world you're in, children are nothing more than a mistake. Children are not anything that you cherish or care about. No, because you don't live with a sense of past, and you don't live with a sense of future. You live totally in the present. It's because that the Gemara says in Yavam, is because of that pasuk of Zirma Susim Zirmasam, that there's no yichus, no sense of genealogy between father and son outside of Klal Yisrael. A society which sees children as nothing more than a mistake and they're not the focus of procreation is a society which does not live with a chain of events. No, Jews, they're obsessed with children and they're unbelievably obsessed with memory. You know what's probably the most popular prayer in the Jewish calendar? Yizkor on Yom Kippur. That's when everybody shows up to remember the past. Remember the people that aren't here anymore. You know, when I first came to Israel, that was, God help me, 1964. I don't think your parents were thought of yet then. So in 1964, I remember across the street from which was then the central bus station in Jerusalem, there was a sculpture which has now been moved to in front of the Supreme Court. This big pillar, it looked like a remnant of a bombed out wall. And on top it said, Nizkor, we will remember. So curious as I was, I wanted to know, like, what's the story of this pillar? And they told me that at the time, this was going to be the memorial for the 6 million Jews which were murdered in the Holocaust. And there had been a political argument between the prime minister at the time, which was David Ben-Gurion, Zichron Livracha, and the minister of religion, which was the head of the Mizrahi, Nepal Mizrahi, that's what it was called at the time, Harav Yudalev Maimon. Okay, Harav Maimon. Rabbi Maimon, one of the signatories of the Megillat Atzmaut, he wanted them to write Yizkor, that God should remember. Obviously, David Ben-Gurion was not too religious, so he wanted them to write Nizkor, we should remember. Well, obviously, politically, the prime minister overruled the minister of religion, and that pillar said Nizkor. I, not being aware of the political story behind it, looked at it, and I was very, very happy that it said Nizkor. I know that God remembers. I don't need him to remember. I don't have to tell him to remember. He remembers. God never forgets. The past, the present, and future all lie in front of him in one scope. The question is, will we remember? Will we remember? Now, what is memory? Let's define memory. Now, the Gemara says in Derech Eretz Zuta that one of the midos of a Talmud Chacham is kones, sofeg, v'zachron. He accumulates experiences, he sponges them in, and he lives in memory. You know what that is? It's very simple. Memory is the tool in which you can take the past, make a mental image of it, and live it constantly in the future. And your present becomes the bridge between the past and the future through that power of memory. You can literally relive things. That's what memory is. We are obsessed with memory. We want to live the past and bring it to the future. That, my friends, is what children are. You know, the Mishnah says in Eduyot that the different things that the father bequeaths to the child. And Rebbe Kiva adds, Af hadorot shelefanav. Also the generations which preceded the father are given to the child. You take the saddlebags of history and you pass it on, and it gets a new flavor. But we had it yesterday, and our today's job is to bring the yesterday to the tomorrow. That's what children are. They are the heroes of our memory. So Nizkor, I think, is a great thing to have on a pillar. I think it's better than writing Yizkor. I know he remembers, but will we? Our challenge really is, to what extent do we live in the past? To what extent do we want to push that past into the future? And to what extent have we dedicated our lives to doing that? I remember when my firstborn was born, that was like 6 years after the wedding. And he was born, thank God. And I had a Shalom Zacher in my house, you know, one of these parties that the Ashkenazim make where they eat chickpeas and drink beer because they're somehow happy that this little thing was born. Whatever it be, one of these neighbors, you maybe have a neighbor which is nice and sweet and old, but asks obnoxious questions, like they pierce into your private lives. So I had one of them like this. Sat next to me and says, what do you feel now? You know, excuse me, I'm not on, I'm not on a TV show, and this is an interview. I really was very annoyed. Why would he ask that very private question to me at that time? So I thought, because he was an elderly person, I couldn't just ignore him because he is a person which you have to be mechabed. He was a zaken, and therefore you have to be mechabed him. So he says, listen, I want to elaborate, but I'll give you a one-liner. So they were all listening. He says, until today, I was Sir Laurence Olivier on the stage playing Hamlet. A great actor, Sir Laurence Olivier, playing Hamlet, which is the dream of any real actor. That little red-faced runt in the back room just kicked me off the stage, and I become producer, director. I doubt he'll let me be a scriptwriter if he's like me. But now he's the star on the stage, and I've graduated from becoming star to producer. I've actually created the next link into the future, and that's what I feel at this moment. Literally, the Mishnah in Ediot of now, my job is to give this little thing in that room the previous generations that he should take it further. So that's Jewish approach to things. That's why we love children. That's why we're obsessed with memory. What's the Egyptian approach to things? Very similar to what you feel when you go back home. A child is oops. You have 2.5 children and 2.5 dogs and 1.6 children. We glorify the today. We don't think about the past. We don't think about the tomorrow. And that is literally the culture at the time. And the king of that culture is Pharaoh. And Pharaoh's palace is, I don't know, are you here from Chicago? Well, I don't know, who Hugh Hefner was. He was the publisher of a lewd magazine called Playboy. A big industry, sorry to say, like in others, it's probably that type of industry is probably the biggest industry in the internet. And he grew up in Hugh Hefner's palace. He grew up, Moshe Rabbeinu, in a cat house, in the house of the Rosin sun. Do I have to be more explicit? I can, I don't want to be. He grew up in a real bad place compared to where he grew up. All of you grew up, your neighbor was the Garden of Vilna. Like he grew up not just in assimilation, not just not knowing Jewish. He grew up in a house where, woohoo, the bunnies were walking around. That's where he grew up. He grew up with people who were dancing on poles. Do I have to be very explicit? That's where he grew up. That is where Mo, with his Egyptian name, grew up. The child that's drawn from water grew up. This is Moshe Rabbeinu. Now, I want you to see this and understand what the Torah is telling you here. Somehow, we don't know what happened. All we know, again, he's not aware of his Judaism. He's growing up in a cat house. I don't know if you know the expression. Bad place, okay? He somehow intuitively has a healthy sense of justice, which may come from his stepmother, because he chose to save him. Could be. And then, you know what happens 67 years later? He's super prophet. He's the man which has the deepest, profoundest sense of God awareness than anybody in history will ever have. He's the closest to God that any human being can ever and will ever be. He is a person, let me describe his personality at that stage. He's at the SNET. The guy is pushing 80. And God tells him, Shal na'alecha mi'al raglecha, remove your shoes in plural from your feet. And the Shalah, you ever hear this guy called Yeshaya Horowitz? He's buried next to the Rambam in Tveria. Have you ever gone to these grave hopping tours that people do? You know, and you come to Israel. When I was a kid, I thought the only Kever Tzadikim was Graceland, you know, with Elvis. Now I came to Israel, and there's so many graves here, and everyone's going to pray. You know what I mean? Well, I guess it's a very Israeli thing to go to Kvarim. I always say, why go to the cave of the Rambam? If you don't learn Rambam, he's dead. If you learn Rambam, well, he's alive for you. Why are you going to his grave? You know, but for many people, I guess the Rambam is dead weight. So you go to his grave. And the next name is the Shalah. Now, the Shalah was a third generation Talmud of the Ari. Goinim, I mean, the Magavram brings him Be'emu V'yira. You know what I mean? You're scared of a Shalah. A Talmud of Mari Srug, which is a Talmud of the Ari. Just want to know who we're talking about. At the time, he was the head of the Ashkenazi Kehila. It was the Torah authority of all of Eretz Yisrael at the time. And the Shalah asks the question, why does it say, Shal na lecha mi'al raglecha? And by Yoshua, when Yoshua met the Sar Tzva Hashem, it says, Shal nalcha mi'al raglecha. Did Moshe have to take two shoes off and Yoshua had to take one shoe off? That doesn't make sense. We must conclude when it says by Yeshua, Shal nalcha mi'al raglecha, that the singular fashion goes on both. Means nalcha means both shoes, or the phenomenon called shoes, me'al raglecha, from that phenomenon called feet. Make your feet shoeless. That's what it means. Okay, so we use it in a singular expression, make your feet shoeless. Well, why is it by Moshe Rabbeinu it says take your two shoes off your 2 feet? And by Yeshua it just says make your feet shoeless in singular form. And the Shalah answers, and this is actually copied by Rabbi Yitzchak of Volozhin in a Haggadah found in a book called Ruach Chaim, which is a sefer of Reb Chaim of Volozhin on Pirkei Avos Perik Aleph Mishnah Aleph. It's also found the idea is found also in Nefesh HaChaim. This is not, well, I'm not giving you a course on that. So whatever it be. And there he says as follows. You must understand, the Rambam says, a regular prophet cannot really hear the words of God. It's like a transmission which is too much for him to handle. And because he has such acute body awareness, as we all do, there's enormous static. He can't get that transmission. So a regular prophet goes literally through an epileptic seizure, falls apart during prophecy. The Rosh of the Rambam is a vorov mizdazim, his organs like they tremble. The koach haguf koshel, and the strength of the body simply fails. And only then, v'tishaer hadas panri, then his mind is free to understand what he sees. In other words, body awareness does not allow a direct transmission from God. Even at that stage, he still has at least a subconscious body awareness. That's why he does not hear a word of God. He sees a rhyme and a riddle, a metaphor, and he somehow, through the prophecy, the discipline of prophecy, interprets that rhyme and riddle, and that is what you read in the Navi. What you're reading in the Navi are not the words of God, but the words of the prophet explaining what that rhyme and riddle were. All this because his body awareness creates a major buffer zone and doesn't allow him to have a direct relation with God. The only person which has no such issue, he's walked out of his sense of self. He is nothing more than a chariot of God. He's a hammer and a tool and a chisel, is Moshe Rabbeinu. He doesn't have a sense of self. He walked away from body awareness. He walked away from his leather covering of his soul. The soul is like a body. Its source lies up in the heavens, and the lowest level of that soul is expressed in your body. You know that? It's called nefesh and ruach. Even the neshama, which is another aspect of the soul, is not expressed in your body. Nefesh and ruach, the lower level of the soul, is expressed in your body, and your body is like the shoe. And the lower level of the neshama, of nefesh and ruach, is like a foot. So God tells them, in this prophecy, you must take away, first of all, your good old shoes, but more so, you must walk away from your body awareness. Shal na'alecha means not just your physical shoes, but also your body awareness. You must take it off, because that which covers your soul. Because we are going to have a direct relationship. That's what the Shalah says, and that's what Reb Chaim Volozhin brings. It's based on a Rambam in Hilchos Yesodei HaTorah, Perik Vav. Read it. Moshe Rabbeinu prophesizes standing upright. He's awake. He's not asleep. He doesn't need any imagery or any imagination. He doesn't go through seizures. No, he just kedaber isha re'ayu. Pasuk in Baaloscha. Look it up. That's Moshe Rabbeinu. Now you ask yourself a simple question. How did he get there? How did he get from being the Egyptian prince living in a cat house, Hugh Hefner's palace? You know, I don't know what. He was like living in Caligula's palace. What can I tell you? And all of a sudden, 67 years later, he's capable of undoing himself from any body awareness and being the most profound human being in history. And it's interesting. The Torah doesn't tell you how. Actually, it's interesting. Not even the Midrash tells you how. The only book which tries to tell us what happened those 67 years is some anonymous book which none of the Rishonim take seriously. It's called Sefer HaYashar, printed by, I didn't want to tell you the whole background of it. The Ramban is very skeptic about the book. He writes in one place, Im na'amin l'Sefer HaYashar, etc. It's a nice way of saying I don't believe him. It's a book which no one takes seriously. This is people mistake. This is nothing to do with Rabbeinu Tam Sefer HaYashar. It's a historical book called Sefer HaYashar. If you know the story behind it, you would be very, very skeptical, as I am. Not even skeptical. I'm sure it's a farce. It's mythology. Ultimately, the Chazal, Teresh V'Ksav, Teresh V'Alpeh, and the Rishonim know nothing about what happened to Moses for 67 years. Now, remember, this is a short story written by an author. What kind of author? What does this author want to tell you when he doesn't give you the name of the family, no influences? He doesn't even want to tell you the name of the influences. If I would have told you his father was Amram, we'd say, he probably had a secret chavruta with him. You know what? Vis-a-vis some secret tunnel. No, not that. What we're telling you, this child had no external influences in his Judaism. Nothing. And that's why he's depicted that way. Nothing. He's a clean slate. Grew up in the worst place possible compared to him. You guys were born, next to the Mishkan. Get that straight. You did not grow up in a cat house. Okay? At least you knew your Jewish parents and you were born feeling Jewish. Okay? The only thing he may have had over you is a raw sense of justice with a slightly hot temper, which I hope you don't kill people. Okay? That's the only thing I know so far. And then I know that after he's around 79, running around somewhere we don't know where it is, he still expresses that sense of justice and helps these anonymous girls with nourishing their sheep, because the other shepherds are really nasty to them. And then as a nice person just walks away, and then this father says, hey, that type of a guy, bring him over, you know what I mean? And he gets him married. That's all you know about him. And then he's a shepherd. Where did he get the training to become who he was? So what is the author telling you? Exactly that. He's an autodidact. He's a self-made man, which came from the worst place possible and became the greatest possible. That's exactly what the author is telling you. He does not have a name. We don't know of external influence. We don't even care to tell you the external influences, because the literary character has no external influences. The message here is being told you. The literary character Moses is saying that he's John Doe, grew in a garbage can, a waif, and became the greatest person in human history, with nobody to help him but his own self. That means he took his 10 fingers and he formed himself. That is the message of the author, saying you better start believing in yourself, guys. Because look at Moses. You started much better off than him. You went to a Jewish high school. You even took a year or two off for a yeshiva. Would you believe it? He didn't have that. He didn't have anything. He had nothing. He only knew he was Jewish. We don't even know if he was monotheistic at the time, in the very beginning. We know he was Echab. Do we know that he was a member of the covenant? He didn't grow up in it. What happened? And one day you're Jewish, and therefore you're a member of the covenant, and became frum, and he killed the guy because of a din of Sheva Mitzvah Neinoach. Are you kidding? And when the Medrash tells you he killed him with the Shem Hashem, that's metaphor, man. The guy was, he's Jewish. How would he know Shem Hashem? The Jews didn't know Shem Yud Kei Vav Kei. Read Chumash. How was he supposed to know it? Who taught it to him? His Egyptian valet? One has to understand what this is telling you. How far it was. And he took 10 fingers to do it. And that's a frightening message by the celestial author. A very frightening message. I had a close friend. His name was Shlomo Karabach, Zechat Tzaddik Livracha. When I was a young boy, he once told me, Mendel, never forget this. You're probably going to end up preaching. I know you, yeah, big mouth, you know what I mean? I wanted to be a lawyer, but somehow I ended up being a teacher, which my mother never forgave me. Once she's passed on, by now she forgave me. He told me, listen, never tell the kid to believe in God. It won't help. Tell them that God believes in them. That's the message here. God is telling me, I believe in humanity, and I want you to see it. Moses he's a waif. He's a mushroom without roots. He's snaf the dara. You make a shakal near b'dvorei on him, not even a burpi adama. He has no roots. And yet, wow. Wow is a small world. It's a word. It's so big. And this is all basically lies in one piece of Gemara in Chulin. I'm going to teach you a Gemara in Chulin. The Gemara says in Chulin, it's very interesting Gemara in Chulin. Page 139b. Kuf Lamed Tes Amud Beis, if you speak Yiddish. There's a mitzvah called Ken Tzipor. If you walk in the road and you see a nest with a female bird brooding over the eggs, and you're interested in the eggs, so you don't take the eggs while the mother's there, that's nasty. That's not compassionate. And you should at least feel sensitivity yourself, and you shouldn't do that. That's why you shoo away the mother, and then you take the eggs. That's how it was. That's the mitzvah the way it is. I'm not going into what people do today. Whatever, that's what it is. The mitzvah is, if you're going to take the eggs for personal usage, show sensitivity to the mother bird by shooing her away before you take the eggs. The Rambam says the reason for that is because we want to internalize into you a sense of sensitivity. Not that God cares too much about the feeling of the bird, but we care about your feelings. We don't want you to lack sensitivity to everything. A beautiful, beautiful, beautiful mitzvah. Trying to make us sensitive, not just to people, but to everything, which is very, very important. It's a beautiful mitzvah. So the din is, it has to be technically only if it's on the Adama, it's on the earth, on the tree or on the earth. Something. What happens, the Gemara asks, if you found a nest of birds on the head of a Homo sapien? Now, that's a bit of an awkward story, but I don't know if you ever heard of the Ascot races. Famous races in England, Ascot. Oh, for centuries, women wore the most outrageous hats in Ascot. Like they would have hats with fruit baskets on them, birds and cages on the hats. Really, so I always look at this Gemara and say, this is obviously the ancient custom of Ascot. Must have gone back to Babylon, where they had these weird people wearing birds' nests. So here's the story. What happens if you have a bird's nest on the head of a person? Is that called on the earth? Why is that a question? Because we were taken from earth. Are we still defined as earth? Well, we were taken from earth, but it went through a major metamorphosis and transformed into derma and calcium, etc. But somehow the original matter was earth, or afar, and therefore, is that still perceived that we are a derivative, and we are still called, you are walking earth. And if it's on the earth, so then the nest on the head of a Homo sapien is on the earth, and you do shiluach haken. And the Gemara brings a raya, because the pasuk says, "V'ha adama al rosho." Adama, earth, was found on the head of a man. Now, when earth is uprooted from its source, we don't call it earth, we call it dust, afar. When it's connected to its source, it's called adama, earth. if I write that you have earth, Adamah, on the Rosh, on the head of a Homo sapien, you just said that it is not dust, it is earth, and it's not uprooted from its source. Equals, you are walking dirt, you are walking earth. That's what you are. This is the Gemara. Now, it's a very weird Gemara. If it would be some kind of a metaphor, that would be sweet. But this is halacha l'maisa. We paskin this. You are called Adama. Immediately, the Gemara asked one of the weirdest questions I can think about is, Moshe min ha-Torah minayin? That's a funny question, except for one parsha in the Chumash. She's everywhere. Moshe min ha-Torah minayin. Where's the inference of Torah Moshe? Now, let's try to understand what that question is. You know about Rabbi Moshe, teacher Moshe, political leader Moshe, King Moshe, Holy Moses. You know, that's a song by Elton John. I don't know, whatever it be. You know Moses with all the shalitas and abbreviations before the name and after the name. You know, the heilig, the holy of the holiest, deepest the deepest, and all the other adjectives, Moshe. That's true. What we want to know is, who's good old Mo? Who's he? Without the adjectives, without the abbreviations. What's he? Who is he for real? Moshe, what is his core essential identity? Strip away all the titles, strip away all the academic accomplishments, strip away the darga and ruchnis, call the other, whatever word, strip it all away, bring him back to bare tax. Who is now? What's that at the end of Bereshis, where the pasuk Hashem lo yadun ruchi adam la'olam b'shigam hu basar v'ayu yamav 120 shana. Says, I can't fight with man forever. He is very vulnerable because he's only flesh. So you know what? I'm going to give him another 120 years chance before I flood him. Because he's so fragile and so he's puny and doesn't do too well, he's just flesh, as one would say. Therefore, you know what? I'll give him a break for another 120 years. If he doesn't fix up his act by then, I'm going to flood the world. So the bishigam, what's the numerical value of bishigam? Beis is 2, shin is 302, gimel is 5 to 305, mem is 40, 345. Well, guess what? Bishig 345 is also the numerical value of Moshe. Mem is 40, Shin is 300, and Hey is 5. This sounds like something straight out of some Shem Shmuel funny book. No, this is a Gemara with Rashi. Zot Rashi, Bishigam hu basar, Bishigam begematria kemo Moshe, Uksiv vayu yamav 120 shana, which is the life of Moshe. So what's the what is it saying? Bishigamu basar, Moshe is flesh. You know what? That's a beautiful Gemara. That's that Moshe that you know with all those abbreviations and all those adjectives, and he's the greatest of the greatest, the highest and deepest of the deepest. Harava going at tzaddik with all the Rosh Tevas before and afterwards, which many of them I don't even know what they mean. You know what he really is? He was not born an angel. He was not born up in the heavens. We don't even care who his father is. He was born in a cat house. But he's flesh. That's all he is. Moshe is a human being, a frail human being, which took himself and made himself into the most profound human being in the history. That's what this Gemara tells you. Moshe, begematria b'shigam. B'shigam hu basar equals Moshe hu basar. Vayu yamav 120, Moshe hu basar, and he will live 120 years. Yes. That's an unbelievable Gemara. Please remember it. Kuf lamed tes. When we say we are Dhamma, it means to say we have potential. Mother Earth is the mother of all potential. All growth comes from Mother Earth. Yes, Moshe is also Adama. Moshe is Basar. And Basar, we just learned, is Adama. Adama is potential to what? Maral says the ultimate goal of Adama, of man, is to become Adam from the word not just of Adama, but realizing that potential, Becoming Adameh, I will be like Elyon, like the celestial one. We take our Adama, we take our potential, which you can do whatever you want with it. You can squander it, or you can actually build something beautiful through it, and you can become Adameh Elyon, you become godly, totally godly, to the extent that you have no body awareness, and when you look in the mirror, all you really see is the neshama, which is somehow expressed in a guf. That's Moshe Rabbeinu, no body awareness. He only thinks of his soul. That's the Moshe Rabbeinu of the first stage of this part. That's what's happening here, and that's why the Torah doesn't give him a name, and that's because we want to know who is the man. The Torah wants to teach you this. Moses is anonymous. The second, well, I'm going to stop now. This will have to go some other time. The second introduction to Moshe is this week's parsha. And this week's parsha, when we talk about Moshe, not as himself, not as who he is. Well, let me just add a remark. Do you notice? He has a family. He had a name, but he's never called by that name. He's always called by the name of his youth when he was an Egyptian prince. He was called by the name that he had when he was growing up in that cat house. Moshe and the Torah does not forget the past and wipe it out. Like some guys suddenly from out, they're calling themselves by the name they were called up for their bar mitzvah they'd never heard before. You know what I mean? I grew up called Steve, all of a sudden called Chaim Shloime. You know these guys, they go to these yeshivas, they start speaking Yiddish. You know, do you notice there's certain people that they think they become from, they start, their shoulders get close to their ears, and they start going like this all day, and they have this raspy voice, and they think they were born in Volozhin, and they say Ichmein, Memele, and things like that. You know the type? Terribly obnoxious. I gotta tell you a story. It was unbelievable. I still remember once, this years ago, I had some students which decided to, a year before they were going to YU, go to Reb Tzvi Kushelevsky. That at the time was a very popular yeshiva. So they were like 3 years at KBY, went for a year to Reb Tzvi's, and then they went back to YU. So I went to visit them. I go in there and I see this kid. Now I'm from Chicago. So I say, you know, hey, that guy's from Chicago, I'm sure. What's his name? I don't remember. So I go over and say, hey, where you from? He looks at me and says, me, I'm from Atipa Sarucha. I look and says, man, I thought you were from Chicago. No, Tipa Sarucha, because it says Da Mayin Basa, Mi Tipa Sarucha. Come on, for me, be normal. You know, give me a break. Where am I from Tipa Sarucha? Your name is Joe, and you're from the Southwest Side. Do me a favor, you know what I mean? You know, that some people want to erase their past because they want to create a new person. It's wrong. We are memory-oriented people. We do not erase our past. We take our past with us because that is the reason of who we are today, and we elevate it and make it bigger. We don't deny our sins. Mine, I don't know about you. You don't sin. You're sweet. I grew up in the 60s. I do not deny my sins. I acknowledge them. I'm ashamed of them. I acknowledge them. I also acknowledge the fact that they catapulted me into a certain growth and a capability of doing great things today, which I couldn't have done if I wouldn't have had those experiences. Yeah, it's truth. I acknowledge that my averis hopefully turned into zachiyos because I used those feelings and those experiences to be marbu kavod shamayim. If I would be growing up with the name of Steve, I wouldn't change it to Chaim Shlomo. I would call myself Steve. Yamod, Rav Steve, Ben John, you know, what's wrong with that? Steve reminds me of the past. I take the past to the future. Moshe did the same thing. He didn't know after becoming a holy prophet, okay, to fit this Moshe thing. That's an Egyptian prince's name. That's what they called me when I was living in the bordello. No, now I'm holy and rolling. I should call myself Chaim Shloime. I don't know. His name was Tuvia, Avigdor. He had other names, you know what I mean? Why didn't he call himself Avigdor? Hey, you guys have a holy man, Rabbi Avigdor, in your old city. He should have called himself Avigdor. No, I'm calling myself by my Egyptian name. Something to remember. Moshe Rabbeinu teaches us Wherever you came from, you can be the greatest. Take your past and it will rise with you to the highest echelons of existence. You will be the greatest, and whatever in your past catapulted you to the present and formed you in a certain way, which made you sensitive and aware to so many different things. Sometimes I think about today of how many greatest, there's so many people, Balei Tshuva, which are educators, because they understand much more the challenges of the youth of today than some guy that grew up in cotton wool in Meashurim. Sometimes you need people like that to be able to attach themselves to people. Well, that's installment number 1, guys. I think I'm going to stop now because otherwise I can go on for another hour, which you probably have no patience for, and I need a cup of whiskey to go further anyway. So it was great learning with you. Make the most of it. Use your past, use your present, and make a beautiful future. That's what this is all about. And remember, you got a much better head start than good old Moshe Rabbeinu. And he used 10 fingers to become who he was. So you have 10 fingers. You know, people think you're only supposed to use this finger for learning. That's shtiyot. You're supposed to take this and make it into this. If you can't translate this into the total self, you should be selling insurance. That's not learning. Learning is transforming the ideas and the values into everything you do in life with all your 10 fingers. Think about it. Judaism is beautiful. You just have to live by it. Have a great one. I'm leaving. Bye.